Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires. Yes, it's a double World of Darkness week with a Mage the Ascension video and a Vampire the Masquerade video. And you know what Vampire the Masquerade video this is because you checked the header. You know what you're tuning in for. We are once again returning to the bloodlines of Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire the Dark Ages with some exceptions. Namely, if a bloodline doesn't have a symbol, I'm not ranking it. And if that bloodline is a part of the Laibon, it can go in another video that is dedicated entirely to the Laibon, Kindred of the Ebony Kingdom, should we ever decide we wish to talk about that. But where did we get to in our last video? Well, where we got to in our last video was me saying thank you so much everyone who has picked up a copy of either Curseborn or The World Below, or now they came from the RPG Anthology, which is a book I'm very proud of, as a means of basically funding this video series. Again, the money isn't coming straight to me, but if you want to pay me money to have me create videos, my Patreon is accessible via MatthewDawkins.com, as is a link just to send money to my PayPal account. I'm not asking for money. It is purely if you like these videos and you have a particular request. I always respond better when someone is either paying me for my time or, and I kind of prefer this, picking up a role-playing game I've worked on, especially a recent one like The World Below or They Came from the RPG Anthology or Curseborn, and letting me know, because then I will give you a video to accompany your role-playing game. So, where did we reach last time? Well, let me take my corner again, because as always, we're going to be populating as much of this space as possible with our rankings, and we had just done the Lamia, and we had just rated them as Ancilla, or Ancillae, Ancilla. They are firmly middle ground, is what I decided. And while there were some arguments to the contrary that this witchy bloodline of blood magicians, disease carriers, Lilin, Bahari have more to say, I'm not going back and changing my rankings, and there's nothing you can do to make me change my mind. That takes us on to the Lhiannan, our pagan bloodline, more certainly present in the Dark Ages and Masquerade. They are a very interesting bloodline. I'm actually a fan of the Lhiannan. I did put a reference to them in Let the Streets Run Red for V5 as well. I don't know how many people noticed it, but they certainly don't exist in any number in Masquerade, largely because they are bound to certain locations, spirits, and so forth. But I've enjoyed that kind of, dare I say, less civilized take on blood magic. Everything that the Tremere does, even to an extent Assamite sorcery or Banu Hakim blood magic, or call it what you like, is all rather formalized and traditionalized, whereas the Lhiannan's discipline of Ogham is crude. It is bloody, it is violent, it surrounds sacrifice, and it involves nature. And I think that is largely what I like most about them. I like the fact that their discipline intersects with nature magic in a way that we don't often see the vampire bloodlines doing. I mean, I can definitely see the argument that there aren't many vampire myths that involve vampires that control, let's say, thorny hedgerows, tree roots, and so forth. But I still see the presence there. I mean, it appears somewhat in Coldonism as well. The idea of a vampire that is able to not just control their own blood, but control the blood of their environment, up to the point of floral blood, sap, and so forth. That all speaks very warmly to me. So I like the Lhiannan a lot, and whenever I run Dark Ages games, I'm always very keen to put Lhiannan characters in, because even in the Dark Ages, they seem ancient, they seem like throwbacks, they don't quite fit into the setting, because of the increasing Christianization of Europe at the time, where most Dark Ages games tend to be placed. So yeah, I think the other thing I like about the Lhiannan, so I'm really upselling them in this, is how while they are more likely than not a gangrel bloodline, they are descended from the Crone, they believe, who is a character that appears in various vampiric apocrypha. And yes, they have certain gangrel traits, but they are not necessarily a gangrel bloodline. In fact, the Lhiannan could be a faded clan. It ties into one of my favourite minor plots of Gehenna, the idea of there being the children of Lilith out there as well, and the Lhiannan potentially being one of the clans of Lilith. So I am a big fan of them. Their utility is lacking, I will say that. I don't think they do work well in the Masquerade, and in fact they work most strongly as storyteller characters, but in the Dark Ages, I think, especially in a localized game of Dark Ages, Vampire the Lhiannan can function very, very well. So I'm not going to put them as antediluvians, but I am going to be putting them as Methuselahs. Yeah, Methuselahs is probably a little more generous than they deserve, but that is where they're going. So, next up, the Magyar. Some of you aren't going to have heard of the Magyar before. They only appear in 2 books, V20 Dark Ages and V20 The True Black Hand book, Tal Mahera. And I am responsible for naming them, as I recall. I remember the email conversation back in 2014, I want to say, where one of the writers wanted to introduce a Kierseed bloodline, because True Black Hand is supposed to be a strange book with a strange faction in, where there's all kinds of abominations. You know, there are werewolves that have been embraced, there are, as we know, changelings that have been embraced, and rather than having the Kierseed, who are more overtly a La Sombre bloodline, naming embraced changelings as a separate bloodline was something that we were discussing, so that they can get included in that book as a new bloodline. And I think it was the first new bloodline that was introduced into V20, I want to say. And I came up with the name Magyar, and there was no intention of connecting it to A Song of Ice and Fire or anything like that. I think there's a Magor in A Song of Ice and Fire, but that wasn't. It was the idea of giving the a sort of fey sound, and you know what? I think M may have been for moths, and R just because it sounded hard. I mean, this is the kind of thought that goes into naming a bloodline. It doesn't necessarily have to have a genesis anywhere. That is about the only affection I have for the Magyar. I have no doubt that the thought that went into their creation was magnificent. Some of the best that the writers behind them came up with. Probably not. I'm sure the writers came up with far better ideas than this. I just do not see the point of them. I don't think they add anything. In fact, I think they take away. I especially think the Dark Ages trait, where they basically bear all kinds of... They can bear various physical mutations, like multiple arms and things like that, is bizarre, frankly. And I actually prefer the idea that changelings just do not survive the embrace. I think it is something that marks changelings as unique. I much prefer that. Obviously, mages can be embraced, they lose their avatar. Werewolves can be embraced sometimes and they become abominations. The idea that changelings just cannot, they are so full of life and vitality. Having the Magyar be embraced changelings just makes it lose something for me. And I think that the Kierseed, already existing and fulfilling the function of Fey-touched vampires, vampires who experimented on Fey, in a way the magician equivalent of, well, the Kierseed have a kind of similar heritage to the Tremere, in the sense the Tremere experimented on mages and Tzimisce, or they're mages that experiment on Tzimisce, whereas the Kierseed are vampires who experiment on Fey. The Magyar, yeah. I also don't like their discipline spread, such as it is, and the ability to pick and choose, for much the same reason I don't like Caitiff in Masquerade. I am not a big fan of a clan in Dark Ages, or bloodline in Dark Ages, or True Black Hand, where you get free reign. over your primary disciplines. I think it leads to characters that lack nuance. I have no doubt that some people have made some interesting Magar characters, but for me, they are discharge. That's right, we're throwing them all the way to the bottom of the pile. Now the Nagaraja, or Nagaraja. So, the Nagaraja are a popular bloodline, and there is a reason for this, and it's a video game called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. You've probably heard of it. So there is a character in that game called Pisha, who, for inexplicable reasons, exists in this video game to demonstrate a bloodline in a game where there are various clans omitted. I'm not suggesting there had to be Setites and Assamites and Ravnos and La Sombra in a game, but there is a Nagaraja in this game. And that, I actually really like that. I mean, it sounds like I don't, but I really like that because it shows in Bloodlines. I'm not a huge fan of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I'll say that now. I think it's a deeply flawed game and thoroughly weak after the second section. I think the quality drops off quite severely. But I think the Nagaraja presence is a point of interest. It makes the setting more alive, more interesting, more intriguing. Now, what do the Nagaraja actually offer to the setting of Vampire the Masquerade? Much as with other bloodlines that were introduced as part of the True Black Hand, ultimately ending up in the Vampire the Masquerade Revised Storyteller's Handbook, along with the True Bruja, who we haven't got onto yet. And yeah, that'll be fun. The Nagaraja, I think, appeal to people because there is a grotesqueness to them. There is a darkness to them. When they were first introduced, they had their own discipline of Nihilistics, I think it was called. And, of course, that was turned into a branch of necromancy. Although I quite like them having a unique discipline. It helps really focus what the Nagaraja are about, rather than saying, look, you have access to all of these paths of necromancy instead. I think aesthetically, the Nagaraja are a really interesting, horrible bloodline. They're also a bloodline that is very difficult to play in Masquerade for the reason, of course, well, if you're on the road of humanity anyway, because you're going to be going around eating people. It's very difficult to eat people and keep them alive. Ask Iscariot in Curseborn. But in Curseborn, you don't have to worry about humanity. You just have to worry about what people think of you. In Masquerade, you have to worry about how close you are to the beast because you keep indulging these depraved longings. I find the origins of the Nagaraja rather ill-formed. The idea that they are a Setite bloodline that potentially embraced or was cursed by a Euthanatos, a Chakravanti mage. Again, we have another Tremere emulation clan here, much as the Giovanni and the Kiashid, and now we have the Nagaraja, but it's with the Euthanatos instead of with the Order of Hermes. But I think what is so striking and so appealing about the Nagaraja is they have a unique aesthetic. There is something very, very appealing to the idea of flesh-eating vampires that really marks them apart from the vast majority of bloodlines. I see some people, quite a lot of people in fact, have said, why are they in the Hecata? They've never been a Cappadocian bloodline, they shouldn't be there. It is a nominal joining of the Hecata. They are there because there is nowhere else for them, and they can hide in plain sight among the Hecata. It isn't because they believe in everything the Hecata believes in, it is just a header that they can wear, and as with the rest of the Hecata, they can basically choose a different discipline and curse spread, should they so wish. But I will also give you the pragmatic reason. The Nagaraja wouldn't have ended up in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition if they weren't in Hecata, because there was a very strong push from on high not to have any bloodlines appear. So be grateful for what you got if you want to play a Nagaraja in V5. I'm going to put them at Elder. I like the Nagaraja. I think they are a very specific taste of vampire, but they're a lot of fun, and yeah, they're a lot of fun to incorporate into a game, both as player characters and antagonists. Just be ready players, if you want to play a Nagaraja, to have a very short chronicle, because things can go bad for a character like that very quickly. I'm going to pass by on the Nephilim. I think I mentioned before, they're one of the bloodlines I created, or had created, for V20 Dark Ages Companion. They reappeared in the Cults of the Blood Gods. They don't have a symbol. I do like the idea, because it all ties back to the character of Michael in Constantinople by Night, but I'm not going to rank them. Instead, let's move on to the Nictuku. And this is the Nictuku bloodline in V20 Dark Ages. And this is going to sound like I don't like V20 Dark Ages, and that isn't true. I think there's some very good stuff in V20 Dark Ages, but I think that the book itself it lacks cohesion. Sometimes it feels like so many ideas were just thrown in and without any thought as to how they interrelate to each other. And so it becomes less playable and more encyclopedic. The Nictuku are like that, because the Nictuku, everyone knows, are a fundamental part of the Nosferatu clan backstory. And this bloodline of Nosferatu, of Diablerist, cannibalistic Nosferatu, are not the Nictuku of the Nosferatu myth. They really turn the Nictuku myth on its head. And now, what I appreciate about them is that is a strong choice. It's a really interesting direction to go on. It pokes holes in the established mythos of Vampire the Masquerade, and I think anything that does that earns a certain amount of favour, because there's so much commitment throughout Vampire the Masquerade to the Cainite mythos, which was first introduced as an optional thing, and by the time you get to Revised Edition, it is all but canon. The idea of basically saying, no, the Nictuku weren't the Methuselahs of Clan Nosferatu, they were a bloodline of Clan Nosferatu that hound the Nosferatu, is an interesting twist. It isn't a twist I necessarily like, but I appreciate it. And that's why they're not going to be discharged. I think I'm going to put them as fledglings, however, because they are one of those parts of V20 Dark Ages that I just, in the end, I don't really know why they need to exist, when you could just have a sentence or two that says, some claim the Nictuku are not the Methuselah child of Absimiliard, but are in fact a bloodline of cannibalistic Nosferatu that work Absimiliard's behest. At that point, you don't need to give them a separate discipline spread, you don't need to give them a different clan bane or curse or what have you. They are just Diablerist, Diablerie-addicted Nosferatu, who are terrifying boogeymen. So yeah, they are fledglings. Noiad now, another one of our regional gangrel bloodlines, to complement the Ander, who we spoke about a while back. I have not much to say about the Noiad, quite honestly. I don't find them terribly interesting, but at the same time I don't find them offensive. I think the Noiad kind of create a bridge between the Lhiannan and the Ander in some ways. It's just they lack a lot of the interest. The one thing I do like about them is their positioning in Scandinavia, specifically Finland, because it's a part of the Dark Ages setting that is often just ignored. Not many people set their games there unless they live there. Most people sort of go for the Courts of Love or the Fiefdoms of the Black Cross or the Baronies of Avalon. So I like that. So they are an interesting piece. I think the problem with the Noiad is I can't really tell you much that really attracts me to them. I can't really sell you on them. They just happen to be there. And because they're not offending me, this is going to seem odd in comparison to some of the rankings I'm giving. I'm just thinking it over, you know. I put the Meara as discharge because I think that their concept is just unnecessary, utterly unnecessary when you have the Kirsheed. And I just put the Nictuku as fledglings, despite the fact I probably wouldn't use them as that purpose. I think I'm going to put the Noiad as neonates, which is stronger than the Nictuku, and I'm divided on that. And the reason I'm doing it is a pretty weaselly one. I'm neither offended nor drawn to them. That means they're not strong enough, interesting enough to be ancilla or higher, but they're also, I can't just dismiss them. I can't say this makes the game suck for me, because, well, nothing makes the game suck for me, but there's nothing... I could play a Noiad. I think the problem is I'd play it as a gangrel. So the Noiad are, in a sense, the gangrel. And I'm gonna say a neonate and move swiftly on before you interrogate me too much further. Old Clan Tzimisce. Well, Old Clan Tzimisce. A bloodline, if you like, that has been, well, I think very well received since its creation, oddly. I think they first appear in Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand. They are the idea of Tzimisce that aren't necessarily infected with vicissitude. Though that hasn't always been the case. They've still had vicissitude as a clan discipline at points, and then it gets changed so that they more dominate Auspex and, I want to say, animalism. Yeah, the Old Clan Tzimisce have moved around a bit in the setting, and the idea being that maybe that some more of them have been Coldinists, sorcerers, essentially. There's a lot of Tzimisce history that's actually a little bit murky and confused, because for a while the idea was Old Clan Tzimisce was just how the Tzimisce were in the past, before they succumbed to vicissitude infection. Then it was the Old Clan Tzimisce are Tzimisce who just don't use vicissitude now. And then it was that they are the part of the clan that spawns the Coldinists. And then they became separate still. So they have a rather loose place in the setting. But I think, aesthetically, there is something deeply interesting about these dragons. This idea of Old Clan Tzimisce occupying their old ruins, their towers, cowing the peasants, having hounds of hell and brides of Dracula, commanding their fiefdoms in the modern era as a Dark Ages voivode might. There is, I think, a lot to appeal about the Old Clan Tzimisce without all the vicissitude stuff. It goes to show almost that there is a worthwhile Tzimisce concept worth playing, absent of their disciplines. And I also think that combination of three disciplines, which I just mentioned, of animalism, Auspex, and dominate, is an interesting combo that you don't, doesn't come up that often. I'm trying to think. Dominate and Auspex, of course, are a Malkavian combo of old. Animalism and Auspex, of course, were a Tzimisce combo of old. It's a way of making the Tzimisce more Ventrue and La Sombra-like without leaning into any of the flesh crafting. And I think for a lot of people, that is an appealing prospect. It really adds credibility to the idea of playing an old generation lord, a voivode or lady, a baroness or something like that, who can trace her lineage back hundreds of years. My family has owned this land since time immemorial, she says, and by being upon it you are now my enemy, if you will not be my guest. That's very Old Clan Tzimisce, and I think you can play regular Tzimisce in the exact same way. It's just when it comes to the Masquerade era, so many Tzimisce are basically devolved mutations, sadists consumed with the need to vicissitude fleshcraft absolutely everything they see. Old Clan Tzimisce suddenly seems good and honourable in comparison. They do have a sort of sense of honour, of tradition about them that the modern Tzimisce lack. So I'm going to be very nice here, and I'm going to say that because there's such a strong fundamental character concept in Old Clan Tzimisce, I'm going to put them as antediluvians. And that is very, very generous indeed, because I could very easily pick on the fact that their background is so muddled, but if I did that with every bloodline in this game, then nothing would be antediluvian. I think the Old Clan Tzimisce have a very, very appealing idea behind them. And quite often players who play Old Clan Tzimisce tend to play very interesting and entertaining characters, in my experience. And I've been running this game for a long time. So there we go. That's what we're going to say. Pandas now. The Sabbat version of the Caitiff. Are they a bloodline? Are they a bloodline of the caitiff? Oof. They have their own symbol. I'm not going to review them. I'm not going to rank them because there's the possibility I might do an anti-tribute list, and I think that's where the pandas belong more than in a Bloodlines video. I mentioned last time the Fury Day, the Ravnos Fey-touched bloodline were not going to appear because they don't have a symbol, which takes us to... We'll skip the Salubri because we covered them in the clan video. Which takes us to Samedi, and I think probably the last bloodline in this video. So we will have another one after this. Oh yes, we are still going. The Samedi. The Samedi. This is an interesting one. This is a very interesting one. Because I've encountered a lot of arseholes who play Samedi. I've encountered a lot of arsehole characters. I've encountered a lot of characters who could just be Nosferatu. I think what makes the Samedi work, what makes them appeal so much, is a few things. One, they are just cool as fuck. There is something very cool about the idea of playing the offspring of Baron Samedi. Whether you're a fan of Live and Let Die, or the Lower, or anything Voodoo related, there is something very, very cool about playing a vampire of the Samedi bloodline. I don't think that can be taken away from them. I think also, as far as their discipline combinations go, although their combinations have changed over the editions, at one point they had Necromancy and Thanatosis, and I think Fortitude, and then they had Obfuscate, Fortitude, and Thanatosis, and then Thanatosis rolled into Necromancy, so things have been adjusted. I like the idea of... I prefer the idea of Samedi without Obfuscate. I prefer the idea of Samedi with Fortitude, Thanatosis, and probably not Necromancy. I'd probably give them Potence, but that's by the by. Thanatosis, much like Neolistics when I was talking about the Nagaraja, there are some unique disciplines, even some of the unusual ones, that I treasure because they are just so defining, so definitive when it comes to the bloodline that uses them. And Thanatosis, while it does feel very much like the Cappadocian Mortis discipline, but really brought down to a crudeness, I think it is wonderful for the Samedi. They are mercenaries, they are assassins. This is how they were positioned when they were introducing the, I want to say, the Vampire the Masquerade Companion. And they then disintegrate the remains of whoever it is they've killed. There is, as I say, something incredibly cool about them. What I also like about the Samedi is their muddy origins. There is very easy, especially with Clan but Cappadocian, to say that, or Cappadocian, I should say, that links them to Troglodytia of the Cappadocians. And what I did with Beckett's Jihad Diary was muddy that a little, because I thought, well, let's look at the fact that their weakness is basically functionally identical to the Nosferatu clan weakness, except they always look like rotting corpses. So let's throw some possibility of them being a Nosferatu bloodline on the fire. And let's also throw in the possibility that they may be one of the Drowned Legacies, something I created for Beckett's Jihad Diary, which has appeared in some V5 products since. Haha! That's what the artist wants. People to start rewriting his work. So I love the mystery behind it, and the fact that the mystery isn't just a garbled mess. There are various routes you could take through it, and therefore various stories you could take. So... yeah, I think the Samedi may rank conceptually, aesthetically, discipline-wise, metaplot-wise. They are not heavily entrenched in the metaplot in the way that the Salubri and the Harbingers of Skulls are. They are without a sect, which means you could technically play one in any city, and I've encountered many people wanting to play Samedi in Camarilla games. For some godforsaken reason, they're permitted, despite the fact they look like rotting corpses. I'm going to put them as antediluvians. I am being generous today. Well, we're nearly at the 30-minute mark, so this is where we call it. Samedi as Antediluvians. Where are we left? What are we left with? Well, we have the T's next, the Teliavelik Tremere, the Slakik, the True Bruja, and a few more after that. So, do tune in for the next and maybe the final part of ranking the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. And if you want something ranked from role-playing games, because these clickbaity videos draw the numbers, by all means pick up a role-playing game like The World Below or They Came from the RPG Anthology and contact me through MatthewDawkins.com, or hell, just tip me some money and ask for a video, and I will certainly consider it strongly. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.